Hello, hello. Welcome to Psychedelic Healing. This is your host, Sonia Cotto. I am very honored to introduce and welcome today's guest, someone I look up to very much for his work in the psychedelic field, Dr. Scot Fisher. He's a board-certified psychiatrist who took interest in psychedelic therapy and research, and now is lead facilitator, trainer, and clinical program director for the Segal Trials Center for Psychedelic Research. Welcome, Dr. Fisher.
Thank you so much for having me, Sonia. It's great to be here.
Oh, yes. I remember actually seeing you on stage at the Microdose conference a few years ago, and then hearing you were in Fort Lauderdale, I kind of stalked you until I saw you walk out after your speech and introduce myself, got your card, and kind of been trying to kind of follow you along in all your work. So it's actually a very big honor to have you here today.
Thank you. Yeah, I remember our first meeting well.
Yes. I'm like, you're from Fort Lauderdale. We got to meet. We have to work together. Perfect.
Yeah, just when we see how much we've both grown since then.
Oh, I know. Definitely. I think I had just started my ketamine clinic, and you were actually doing ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which is something that I wanted to kind of tap in to possibly bring into my clinic at the time. But then you started working for Segal. Yes. Yes. So how has that been? Actually, my big question is, how did you transition? What inspired you in that transition from general psychiatry into transitioning into the psychedelic therapies?
I mean, there was a variety of factors that led to that transition, and it definitely wasn't an overnight transition. So yeah, I was doing kind of a general psychiatry private practice here in South Florida. And the practice, was very busy, from, sort of successful from that standpoint. I was just feeling like people weren't getting the sort of results from our standard treatments, the medication and the psychotherapy typically done in the community. Not that no one was getting results, but that just overall, on average, it seemed very disappointing in terms of the effectiveness and even sometimes the safety of these treatments, whether it's, the SSRI antidepressant medications, whether it's the stimulant medications for ADHD, the benzodiazepines, like for anxiety, just, didn't seem to go so well for very many people. So I was really getting burnt out doing that sort of practice. And even though my practice was otherwise successful, and I think I was really well liked in the community and by my patients. When you're trying to help people and your tools in your toolkit just aren't getting the job done, it gets really frustrating and really sad. Like as more research has come out, we've come to see that, treatment resistance and ineffective treatments that we're using it's very, very common. So it wasn't particular at all to my practice. It's a problem that we have in psychiatry and mental health treatment in general right now, I would say. So that was one thing. I was like, how can I continue doing this? I need to find a better way to help people. And then some of my own personal kind of psychedelic use was very personally transformative, as well as I started to see, this was back in probably 2016 or so, where a couple phase 2 studies of psilocybin to treat anxiety in life-threatening terminal cancer illness was coming out from Johns Hopkins and NYU. And the studies were just looking, so incredibly positive. I was like, whoa, okay, there's a few, where there's smoke, baby, there's fire. So that led to me in 2018 doing a certificate in psychedelic therapy and research at the California Institute of Integral Studies, which is located in San Francisco. At the time, it was kind of a one-of-a-kind program for healthcare professionals who wanted to go into psychedelic therapies and treatments. And that program really helped me. I learned so much and also got very well networked. And that's what ended up getting me involved with the Segal Trials group that's here in South Florida. We now have a Center for Psychedelic Research. I was very fortunate. Sorry?
I love that so much.
Yeah, I was super, thanks. I was super fortunate and grateful to kind of for that opportunity to come, across for me. And now I've really gotten a chance to help kind of build our center. We started out with, our first study was a study of psilocybin for major depressive disorder. And we are what is known as a clinical trial site. So we don't tend to sponsor or primarily organize the research studies that we work on, but we're one of some sites or sometimes of many sites who are working on the same study. These are FDA registered studies. They're often done under the auspices of the DEA as well as in psychedelic controlled substances in the majority of situations. So, like one study we're working on now has like 20 plus different sites across the country. Another one is going to have 80 or so sites around the entire world. So we're part of a network of sites, spanning the nation or sometimes even the US and Europe, working on the same study protocols. So it's kind of exciting to be a part of kind of this larger group and movement towards investigating the safety and effectiveness of psychedelics for a variety of mental health treatments. So right now we have a study that we're working on of LSD to treat generalized anxiety disorder, and another study, psilocybin, to treat what's known as treatment-resistant depression. And then we are also about to start a study of 5-MeO-DMT, which is another psychedelic some people know of. It's gaining in popularity and I would say awareness. That one is also for treatment-resistant depression. So we're starting to see a variety of the psychedelic kind of molecules being studied for various disorders: depression, anxiety, substance use disorder, eating disorder, some for neurological indications like stroke or memory issues. There's really kind of, it's snowballing in terms of the types of things that are being done. And in the next few years, we'll start to probably see what we call new chemical entities, or psychedelics that people maybe haven't really heard of or are more obscure, starting to be studied as well. I think one thing that's really important to know about these sorts of studies is, as compared to most psychiatric drug treatments, they aren't just sort of given as a standalone treatment. They are given in what we would call sort of a set and setting protocol, which may include sometimes psychotherapy elements, but certainly very intensive psychological support. They can vary a little bit from study to study, but the basic kind of framework is the same, in which 1 to 2 therapists work with each subject in our study. There's usually 3 to 6 hours of preparation sessions with each subject to kind of help build rapport and connection between this group that's going to go into the dosing together.
So 3 to 6 hours, like 3 to 6 different sessions where you meet ahead of time.
Some of them are done kind of split up. Some of the studies have it done all together. Kind of, we'll do just a 3 to 4 hour session with a person a few days ahead of time. Other ones will have kind of 1 hour sessions done in the few weeks before. So that there can be some variation exactly how it's structured, but there's several hours of preparation time. The dosing is done at our center, but it's not really a feeling of a clinical setting at all. It really feels like someone's living room. And the way it works is we have people lie back on a comfy couch. We have a musical playlist that's conducive to an introspective kind of journey. We offer eye masks, and the typical kind of psychedelic psychotherapy protocol. But if people aren't familiar with it, it's really meant to help people go inside, and the therapists are there to talk if there are things to talk about, but it's often meant to support people exploring their own minds and seeing kind of what comes up for them, any different thoughts or emotions that maybe are important for them to experience.
You said 1 to 2 therapists. Does it depend on like the medicine that you're using, whether you decide one therapist versus 2?
It depends on the study, actually. So some of the study protocols specify that there is a lead therapist and an assistant therapist for every participant. And then some of the other study protocols are starting to experiment with the one-on-one therapist per subject in our study. So it'll be really interesting to explore in the future more individualized kind of treatment plans. But right now in these study protocols, they tend to keep things kind of uniform per the study. So that's kind of the difference there. Certainly it's really nice usually to have 2 therapists with each participant in our study, but it's also pretty, intensive in terms of resources, therapist time, and there's a lot of exploration being done about how to increase access for psychedelic treatments, either currently available ones like ketamine or, these ones that we're trying to make available through our studies. How do we increase access? And having 2 therapists per each patient is probably not a great way to have as much access as we would like.
Exactly. Yeah, because that's one thing at my clinic that I want to offer everything that's going to become legalized, as a resource, because we still have patients that maybe may not be able to work through all their traumas, and then we have MDMA coming out, but if we're going to have two licensed therapists in the room, an 8 hour, that's very intensive for the therapist. It's a long day, but it's also a long room. How is it going to be financially like accessible for patients while also us being able to open up doors? It's not that we want to be so profitable and make, people think, oh, the clinics, it's so profitable. It's like, no, we're trying to reach out and help people and want to give access to them, but also need to keep our doors open. So I'm very curious as everything comes to light once it becomes all legalized. I know you said you were saying you had started with the psilocybin trials for the treatment-resistant depression. How far are those? Because we're thinking, oh, MDMA in 2024. Where's psilocybin in your research?
Yeah, I mean, these estimates are sometimes you have to take with a grain of salt.
We're all hoping and like waiting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different groups working on psilocybin for depression. I would say they're probably each at least a couple of years behind MDMA, plus or minus. But the thing that I've learned about working in these clinical trials is every estimate, you just assume it's going to be longer than what they say, and there's just always something that is a delay for one reason or another. It's really working in medicine in general, there's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape, but with these clinical trials, with all the different regulatory bodies involved, and maybe for good reason, to protect safety and make sure things are really done, in the public's best interests, in our participants' best interests. But it does require a lot of patience, as with my clinical mindset and wanting to like get in there and help people and just remind myself, these are scientific studies, and they need to be done according to the FDA's regulations. Even if sometimes I find that personally frustrating, or in certain situations seems like it's not in the best interest of the participants, it's in the best interest of the public to follow these protocols, or at least that's the premise we're operating under.
Yeah, and you are always looking for participants, and so we'll definitely share how to go in and see if you guys qualify for studies. Those listeners out there. But with each study, you have very strict variables that you need to control. So a lot of them are with like medications, and speaking to the medications, I know that, my listeners, everyone is on different medications. And so it is, for safety, we definitely don't condone illegal use of, these substances at all. But for those that are going to go to, let's say where psilocybin is legalized, or where they go to different retreats, what are some concerns that you have, obviously as a physician, that you look at with like medications that, some people will want to stop cold turkey so they can go to Peru and do medicine, or in Costa Rica. And, what are the safety concerns that you look towards and look at with like medications and contraindications for the different medicines?
Yeah, I mean, it's a wonderful question, and it's hard to give a blanket answer. I would say, ideally one should be able to consult their prescribing physician about this question. But the fact of the matter is we don't have always a lot of science right now, and many prescribing physicians just aren't really all that aware of what potential interactions there could be. There's certain things like we know people shouldn't do, like if you're taking a MAOI, or monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which is a type of drug not so often prescribed anymore. But, if you take that and go do ayahuasca, you can get, very sick and even potentially have, life-threatening, sort of symptoms. In terms of, there's a whole plethora of potential drug-drug interactions that can happen between, prescribed psychotropic medications and even any sort of medication you're being prescribed, and psychedelics, far too lengthy to, even if I knew it, it would be very tedious for me to list it all out, and I don't know it.
But there are general, like psilocybin, for example,
I would say that people should really go online and start to consult resources like the Spirit pharmacist, who is a pharmacist who has a lot of resources online. Look at those resources, bring them to your doctor. Don't make this decision on your own. Then you may even be able to find, pharmacists like, the Spirit pharmacist, I forget his name actually, but that's his website, where you can get those resources. So I wouldn't just assume that it's going to be okay. One of the most common kind of interactions, though, is that if you're taking, say, an antidepressant and you take, psilocybin or MDMA, you might not experience that strong of an effect, because those drugs can sometimes blunt the response to those psychedelics. Now, you would really want to be careful in terms of taking any more than that, because we don't have science here. So in terms of more harm reduction sort of techniques, I know a little bit, maybe a little bit enough to be dangerous, but probably not enough to give great advice. The other thing is if you're doing it on your own versus are you doing it with some sort of practitioner, you want to consult the practitioner, because if they don't know, that's a problem. They should know, because they're the one offering you the psychedelic and the psychedelic treatment. I think it's a problem when they say, well, go ask someone else, when they're the one offering the psychedelic. That's, to me, a bit of a red flag, in terms of, there's a lot we don't know, but a lot of underground practitioners or people doing ceremonies, if they've been around for a while, then they should know from experience.
Yeah, and that's a great point to take note, for everyone out there. If you are looking to go into like a retreat space or go into something underground, when you are talking to them, they should be doing a medical consult with you. They need to know all the medications you're on, all the history. If they're not doing that, that is a red flag. They should know what's on board, what medications, what other drugs, all that, because there are interactions. I mean, there's even with like ayahuasca, you have to eat a certain diet, in preparation that can really alter your experience and could be harmful in certain cases. So, definitely, take note of that when going out and searching for retreat spaces.
I think that's a good rule of thumb. The sad thing is like at this point, the science is still being very much restricted, because a lot of the psychedelics are in Schedule 1. It makes it extremely cumbersome to do, research studies like ours. Working with the DEA is, we have a whole team that's devoted to, tasks like that. And maybe that's right now kind of in the public's best interest, but then so much research is places that don't have the resources that we do to do that, like they're not able to do the kinds of research that could help answer these questions better. So if it does turn out that studies like ours help to prove that there is some medical use, it will make research sort of restrictions become much more loosened, and that will help provide more science to help answer these questions for people.
In your when you're actually sitting with and facilitating an actual experience, I do have a question with the LSD, because that seems like a really long day. Like, how many hours is the effect? But in essence, if you were saying like it's more introspective, so you're sitting with the patient and then offering assistance as they're like within themselves. Do you guys actually have therapy, or is it something that they're there within themselves the whole time?
We sort of encourage people to enter that day prepared to take a journey within their own mind. But we also tell them, this is your day, and we're going to let, the sort of drug session experience, let it be led by your intuition of how you want to spend the time. We are here to make sure you're safe. You don't, in an altered state of consciousness, make any sort of bad judgment calls and do anything that would be unwise. But we're also, within that sort of framework, you're pretty free to kind of experience the day however you like. And so I would say the majority of people do find that introspective space for much of the time is helpful, but almost everyone does want to pop out and talk a little bit or get some sort of support. We've had some individuals that talk the entire time or walk around the room, and we say that's fine too. You do what feels right to you. And we don't necessarily have any assumptions about how that day is supposed to go, except that your safety is protected and that you experience that day in whatever way you want to experience it.
Nice.
Yeah.
And how long is a session for? Because somebody had told me that they aren't studying LSD. So I was like, but actually I know somebody who is, because of the length of time that it's not feasible for them, in session.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of questions about, the LSD is a 12-hour dosing. If you look at things like Iboga or Ibogaine, that can be, 24-hour sometimes sort of session, versus, like IV DMT can be like a 10-minute, sort of session. So there's a lot of different duration of action available out there. Certainly, back to the access question, if a shorter acting sort of psychedelic experience is just as good as a longer acting, then great, that's less resource intensive. There is an emerging body of evidence that suggests, though, that longer acting psychedelics Well, to take a step back, we think that psychedelics likely increase neuroplasticity, or the ability of the brain to make new changes, form new connections, have new brain cells or neurons grow. And that isn't only true during the dosing session, but can be true in the time after the dosing session. And so there's a sort of period or window of neuroplasticity that we think occurs after a dosing session. And there's really an emerging body of research that's growing more and more robust, that the longer acting psychedelics have longer periods of neuroplasticity after the dosing. So for instance, ibogaine, which one of the longest acting trips that we know, that period of neuroplasticity can sometimes be, I think, somewhere between like 4 to 8 weeks. LSD, wow, up to 4 weeks. So you get like these longer time frames, versus once you start getting into shorter acting, they can have very powerful experiences, but maybe, and this is all on average, that period of plasticity, or that window, is also shorter. So
yeah, no, with ketamine, it's about 24 to 48 hours.
Right. So yeah,
dosing will like keep dosing within that time frame as they go up.
Yeah, that's another way of potentially expanding upon that period. So these longer dosing sessions could potentially, what's better? Is it better to do serial sort of ketamine? Is it better to do one LSD? We don't know. Maybe that's a study that'll be done someday. But it would be nice to have kind of these longer periods, because sometimes you can't get everything you want to get done in 24 to 48 hours. But, whether it's, kind of having serial treatments, whether it's having just, one long acting session, this is again where we'll probably get more into individualized sort of psychedelic research, in the future. Right now, it's certainly more of an art than a science sometimes.
Yeah, because in these studies, is it one LSD session, one psilocybin session, and that's what you guys are studying, or what's the protocol that you guys?
Yeah, it depends on the protocol, and so the FDA has different sort of phases of research when you're wanting to, potentially have a certain drug approved. There's phase 1 studies, which are safety studies. They're very small studies, and they're really done in kind of what we would call a healthy volunteer population without any specific medical or psychiatric diagnoses. Then you go on to phase 2 studies, which you get continued safety data, but then you also are starting to look at the effectiveness of one of the drugs for a specific treatment indication or problem, like generalized anxiety or major depression, alcohol use disorder, whatever it is. Those are often single dose studies, just because the FDA likes it done that way, to see if there is a signal for treatment of efficacy or effectiveness. But when you get to phase 3, then we start to see more often studies being geared towards multi-doses, where, for instance, one of our psilocybin studies right now is for treatment-resistant depression. There are different parts of the study, but basically there are 2 doses, 3 weeks apart in the first part of the study. And then if someone reaches treatment remission, then we just follow them. If they don't reach treatment remission, they get the opportunity for 2 more doses as the study goes on. So in that study, you can get up to 4 doses and a minimum of 2. So there's many different ways of structuring, how these studies could be done in the phase 3. We're starting to see more and more kind of innovative treatment protocols that probably would bore you and your maybe not you, but your listener.
Not me, yeah, definitely. I could nerd out all day on these.
Yeah, we do think that people could benefit maybe from multiple treatments, and so some of the studies are starting to be geared that way to see if that helps.
Nice, yeah, because it's. Ketamine is nice in that it's a shorter acting, right? You're in and out of your appointment in 2 hours, but you need 6 to 8, 10. We're doing studies now. What is the most effective, going into that? Is it 6 and done, or 6, then, right, tapering into a monthly situation? Whereas I guess the MDMA protocols are saying like 2, right? Then there is some studies in Johns Hopkins, for example, the smoking cessation, where it was 1. Psilocybin or alcohol. So I guess it's going to really be variable as the time goes.
Yeah. And some of the study protocols are done not always because they think this is the best way for the treatment to be done, but just because where they're at in terms of investigating that specific, drug for a specific treatment, that's the sort of study protocol that's called for. So like, for instance, our LSD study now is a single dose because it's a phase 2 study. That's what the FDA wants. As that study goes on to phase 3, there may be a strong chance that they do have a multi-dosing possibility. That'll be up to the kind of the FDA and the sponsor of the treatment, the company, to kind of decide, in terms of what makes sense. But yeah, sometimes, these study protocols aren't necessarily like, oh, we think this is definitely the way to treat alcohol or nicotine use disorder with psilocybin. It's just the study has to be done this way because scientifically that's what's called for.
And with these studies, I'm curious, do you actually use placebos? Do people not get the medicine when you're doing these studies?
Yeah, almost all of certainly the phase 2 and phase 3 studies have some sort of placebo control, which is what we call double-blinded, where neither the participants in our studies nor the therapists or treatment providers know what treatment they are getting. Now, there is a lot of questions and sort of evidence to show that blinding doesn't always work, because people can sort of sometimes guess what they got because of how they feel, and the therapist might be able to guess because of behavioral changes that they observe in the participants. But there's starting to be more and more sort of innovative designs to have some masking of that, and also in general, like, yeah, if the signal is strong enough, if efficacy is strong enough for a drug, then we think that maybe the unblinding isn't all that important. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at this, and a lot of different opinions out there. There's also starting to be a lot more questioning of is the randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study that's kind of been the norm for, ever with the FDA, and still has a lot of relevance. Are there other ways of doing this that could be similarly, scientifically rigorous, and maybe even more effective in terms of investigating the sort of questions we want to answer?
Especially for those that are like suffering in that treatment resistance and they're just so hopeful, and then to not get the actual medicine.
Yeah, it's really hard to, it's hard to remind people that these are scientific studies, and a premise of the study is that they may not get better. Now we're starting to see more studies that have what we would call an open label extension, so that if they're not finding any sort of improvement in the first stages of the study, a few weeks or months in, we will offer them, say, hey, we're going to give you the high dose of the psychedelic unblinded. We all know it. That way there is a kind of a sense that everyone will get a chance to have.
It makes me feel better.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, there are some drawbacks scientifically sometimes for doing that, because you don't always get to compare the different groups long term anymore, because everyone ends up getting a dose. But there's other advantages, including, maybe ethically feeling like, these drug studies are very different than a lot of drug studies, because there is so much hype. There is so many people using them, in the community. Like, no one was taking Prozac underground before, when the drug trials were happening for Prozac. So, there's definitely a lot of different considerations that we have in terms of running these sorts of studies, and knowing that people are watching documentaries and listening to podcasts and, doing all sorts of things to learn about it. Whereas other sorts of drug studies, it's very uncommon to happen.
I do understand also, in the one sense, in the study is, also the work that you're doing, like the prep sessions and the therapy, and really doing that work as well. Even outside of the study, patients aren't getting, right? There's a lot of patients even coming for treatment for me that aren't working with the therapist. They aren't, working regularly to try to treat. Essentially, we're going to the root cause in the subconscious mind. And, that's why we actually require and provide integration coaching, with ours in the prep sessions, integration. We have specialists in the office now, who's amazing with our patients, just setting intentions and really holding that space. That in itself, sometimes we have patients that just want that from us, just come in to speak with us. And that's so important. So there is that factor that there could be improvement just with all the therapy and coaching that you guys are providing in a sense. So I see that end, but then I also, hopefully you guys are going to do the open study afterwards for those that do still struggle. Is that an opportunity for you guys to do that?
That again would be, kind of a protocol specific. Does the study, as organized by the sponsors, that kind of specified as an option. More and more we are seeing studies that have that because for a variety of reasons. So it's really nice when that option is available. It kind of varies from study to study.
Before we actually end this conversation, I did want you to kind of talk to my audience and let them know if they're interested in joining a study, where they can go, what studies you are looking for participants in at this time.
Great. Yeah. Thanks so much for mentioning that. So I think going to our website is probably, the number one thing, just to, and you can put, an inquiry into, it's pretty easy to find a way to kind of, sign up via the website for someone to call you, or you can call us on the website. And so the website is segaltrials.com, SEGAL trials.com. So that's probably the best way to kind of, the website has some information, but the best way is just to get on a call with some of our people where they'll start to ask questions and you'll get some of your questions answered about kind of the studies. Right now, we have still the LSD for generalized anxiety, psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression, or also there is the 5-MeO DMT starting soon for treatment-resistant depression. And we're likely to have another study of a psychedelic it'll be a phase 1 study. So people who are kind of healthy volunteers that don't have any previous kind of psychiatric problems or serious medical problems. And then, we're always having studies end and then new studies start. So, depending on when people are listening to this, if it's, 6 months or a year from now, like it could be very different than, what we have now. So our center is growing a lot. We expect, maybe this time next year, we'll have 6 to 7 different studies ongoing at the same time, very large studies. So yeah, it's kind of a constantly shifting landscape. You can also contact me on my Instagram, drscottfisher.com, DRSCOTTFISHER. I don't always post a lot on there, depending on kind of how busy I am, but people do often message me on there with questions and things like that. So that can be a nice way just to kind of reach out if you want to learn more about our studies and or have someone contact you to see about your eligibility to participate in a study. So we definitely we're always looking for, new subjects and new participants. And, it's the process is quite in depth in terms of, the assessments.
And right on the website, right at the very top, it's like a button that you can press to look at the studies to apply to be part of a study.
Yeah.
And it also said that you were looking to hire. So are you also looking for more guides or help with sitters as well in your facilities?
Yeah, actually, we are wanting to hire, it's kind of on an ongoing basis, but therapists, licensed therapists, we're looking for clinical research coordinators very often, research assistants. Segal's just a rapidly growing company in general, but MDs, psychiatric nurse practitioners, so again, depending on when people are listening to this, if they or someone they know is looking to potentially pursue a career in clinical research and or in psychedelic kind of studies, then, reach out to me on my Instagram or going to the hiring page of our website could be fruitful. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your work, Dr. Fisher. It's been
thank you so much for having me.
It's been so nice watching it on the sidelines and seeing you guys grow and seeing all the research that you're doing. And I send, I have your cards in our office, so trying to help with recruitment or different studies. So
yeah, thank you so much. We definitely appreciate all the referrals, and sometimes we tell some of our people about you guys as well. So
yes, thank you.
There's definitely some cross feedback there.
All right, beautiful. I love that. Well, thank you for your time. And
my pleasure. Thank you, Sonia.
Yes, everyone. This is Sonia Cotto and Dr. Scot Fisher. You have a beautiful day.
The opinions expressed on this CannabisRadio.com program are those of the guests and hosts and do not necessarily reflect those of the staff and management of CannabisRadio.com. Any rebroadcast, republication, or retransmission of this program without proper consent is prohibited.